Hello and welcome. I am your host for the evening, Goblin Kwain, and tonight I'm going to read a handful of stories from the website Your Ghost Stories. And this is one of my favorite places, a website that I've been frequenting for years, over a decade, for firsthand paranormal experiences. People submit, and there's also this awesome comment section because it is a forum. And despite the name, Your Ghost Stories, it's really not limited to ghost experiences or what we may think of as ghost experiences. And I really try and find those more unusual, unique experiences on there. Not that they're more valuable than ghost experiences, footsteps and apparitions of loved ones and things like that. But I just find these more abstract ones just more compelling to me. It's just a personal choice. So the stories that I pick for tonight are quite strange, I think. And you'll have to let me know if you think any of them would actually be categorized as a ghostly experience, if we're thinking of a ghost as a departed human. Although we may have some poltergeist activity. And if that falls into the ghost category for you, and we could probably debate if poltergeists are ghosts in that sense as well. In between the stories, I am going to give some of my thoughts and also read from the comment section that I mentioned because people offer their own similar experiences and also offer some really interesting theories and speculation on what happened in these particular accounts. So, if that sounds good to you, let's get started. Our first story took place in Poland and was submitted by Basil Lisa. It's called Entity with the Covered Face. I spent part of the summer with my relatives in the UK, and in August I flew back to Poland, at the other end of Europe. When I reached my parents' home, I was dog-tired after a night of travel. After getting home and unpacking, I was really exhausted and seriously needed some sleep. So I went to bed. My bedroom was a big, spacious room upstairs. To get there from the stair landing, I had to pass through the other, much smaller room with one window, opposite to the door leading to my bedroom. I could see that window from my bed, and I usually kept the door between the rooms open, as I never really felt safe in my bedroom. That night, I fell asleep very fast, and I slept like a stone with no dreams whatsoever. But there was no rest for me. I woke up suddenly with my heart pounding, and immediately noticed that there was someone in the smaller room, clearly visible in the dim light coming from the window nearby. It was a tall man in an old-fashioned dark suit and white shirt. The most horrible thing was he didn't have any visible head on his broad shoulders. It might sound stupid, but where his head should have been, there was only a mass of something like a stiff, grayish fabric, vertically creased and covering entirely his head and neck, if there, indeed, was any. I was scared out of my mind. I started screaming. I screamed so loudly I had a sore throat for the next few days. I felt like this entity was not Casper, the friendly ghost. It was evil. Fearing that it might come into my room, blocking my way out, and thinking that I would go insane if it touched me or something, I decided to use my only chance of escape. I sprang out of the bed, ran out of the bedroom, and into this smaller room, and dived into that space between the entity and the old wardrobe, standing next to the wall on my left. I was actually doing that with my eyes closed. I would not dare run anywhere near to that something. Miraculously, I managed not to smash myself into anything and made it to the stairs. But when I was running through that place, the entity stood. I swear I touched something. It was cold, smooth, soft and a little bit sticky, a bit like fur covered with cobwebs. Then I flew downstairs, nearly falling down the steps in the process and waking up my dad, a skeptic, who does not believe in the paranormal. He even denied the things we witnessed together. I spent the rest of the night on the couch, and the next day I went to investigate. Believe me, I was scared when I was entering that room, even in the full daylight. I examined everything carefully, looking for anything I could touch accidentally while fleeing from there the night before. Nothing. The wardrobe was closed tightly. No clothes were sticking out. The place where the apparition had been standing was completely empty. No cobwebs on the wall, and nothing fur-like around. To this day, I don't know what I saw and what I touched that night. My parents' house is almost a century old. I don't know about any deaths happening there, but there were many paranormal occurrences in my bedroom and in other parts of the house. Mostly noises, knocks, bangs, footsteps on the stairs, the doors opening and closing by itself, a rattling like someone was pulling the door violently, and once a voice whispering my name. So yes, definitely there is something in that house, but what did I see that night? Really creepy story. There's the description, of course, of the entity of a tall man in an old-fashioned suit with the head that was like a mass of stiff grayish fabric, they said. Even describing it as creased. I mean, it makes me think of Slender Man, right? Because that's kind of what he looks like. And let's see, when was this story submitted? This story was submitted in 2013, so this was after Slender Man came into being, in a way. And then also the description of that sensation they had of when they thought they touched something, that it was cold, smooth, soft, and a little bit sticky, like fur covered with cobwebs. Very strange. You do hear people saying that they get that kind of cobwebby or spider web feeling sometimes when they think they've maybe walked through something paranormal, but the fur covered with cobwebs. Very strange. So I'm definitely going to go through the comment section now, because there's some good comments, good discussion here. In the story, the OP mentions how her father does not believe in the paranormal, even denying things they witnessed together. I thought this comment from Chris B. was interesting, who is also Polish. Quotes, "I know how it is when family doesn't believe. Here in Poland, I think 90% of people don't believe in spirits, and when they see one, they never believe what they see." End quote. So I don't think that's anything that's unique to Poland, but I just thought that was kind of interesting that they offered their own cultural context, and they say that it's also their experience that most people don't believe in spirits or say they don't. Also, in the comments, the OP relates an experience of seeing the reflection of their deceased grandfather's face. Quote, "I don't really think the entity I saw in the story was a dead relative. I saw my grandpa's face in the reflection of the window pane in this house after he died. I felt maybe a little bit uneasy. I was a little girl back then, but not scared. After all, it was my beloved grandpa. And this entity, whatever it was, felt evil." End quote. They also explain some of the sounds they hear around their home. Quote, "The noises are usually footsteps, loud and heavy, like a big man walking. Sometimes it sounds more like someone running or like something heavy falling onto the floor. Sometimes at night, something rattles, like a closed door pulled by someone impatiently. That door, though, does not exist. It got bricked up almost 30 years ago. In the wall nearby, there's a door to the crawl space that sometimes opens up on its own or closes back up. When I used to sleep in that room, I sometimes had dreams about the door to the crawl space opening and something bad coming out of there. I still get them from time to time, especially when I'm going through a stressful period." End quote. So a couple of things I want to mention in that section. A lot of it is kind of symbols that I picked up on, which I'm always reading different symbols. So when they saw their dead grandpa's reflection, they said they saw it in the window of the house. And in this symbology, in this metaphorical way, a window could be a device, to see other worlds or maybe just things that aren't normally perceived by the human eye, right? Also, very creepy that they hear this door rattling, but the door that they hear rattling, it can't rattle anymore because it was bricked up. So that's really spooky and interesting. Then they also mention the door to a crawl space that sometimes opens up on its own or closes on its own. And they said that they will also dream about the door to the crawl space opening and something bad coming out. And they get these dreams, especially when they're going through a stressful period. And again, with this metaphorical thinking, we're thinking on the subconscious level. Maybe the crawl space is where things are stowed away, and it's rattling or it's opening on its own. Yeah, maybe that's some kind of subconscious thoughts coming to the surface or trying to, and especially if it's something that happens when they're stressed out. Yeah, I don't know. I think Jung would have my back on what I'm trying to convey here. Anyway, I'm going to read another comment. This is from Spirit Waiting. Brings up some very interesting ideas. Quote, I too have been through doors rattling, etc. Poltergeist activity, it sounds like. The feeling of cobwebs and cold are usually the spirit or entity touching you. When you felt those two combinations, you most likely ran right into it, or it ran into you. Great experience. It creeped me out. When you gave that description of those two rooms adjoining like that, it gave me the feeling of being trapped. End quote. So, yeah, I thought their suggestion of poltergeist activity associated with the rattling doors was very smart, especially since that one door that they hear isn't even a real door, or at least not a functioning door. And then the crawl space opening and closing and playing a part of their dreams. Yeah, it just really gave me the sense that, especially with the crawl space, that the activity was directly tied to the OP's mental state. And the main theory with poltergeists, of course, is that they are physical manifestations of a person's psychological turmoil. As I like to say, poltergeists are people too. All right, just one more comment from the OP. Quote, the poltergeist-like activity has happened there ever since we moved in. I was 4 then, and I remember me and my sis were scared of a huge old cabinet filled with some papers. It had a habit, if a cabinet can have a habit, of opening by itself in the middle of the night with that freaky sound the old hinges made. Then one summer, when I was 9, my older cousin convinced my sis and me to make a seance with a homemade Ouija board. We used a saucer and some letters cut out of the newspaper. Nothing happened, though I must admit we did not close the seance properly. After that, all of the stuff with the crawlspace door opening by itself started. So I suppose we actually called something during the seance, and it stayed. The newest addition to the ghost activities in the house is the kitchen door opening by itself. Now, I know the door can be faulty and do that because of some mechanical reasons, but I saw it many times, clear as day, the door handle going down and then springing up like it was released by someone rapidly opening the door. And it always happens during the night. The house is a part of a farm, and there were some clearly paranormal incidents outside on the grounds. But that is, I think, another story. End quote. Well, on that note, unfortunately, this is the only story they posted, so we don't get to hear about the activity out on the farm, which I would have loved to. So lots of this doors opening and closing and rattling. It's very interesting. And that is very stereotypical poltergeist kind of stuff, right? Noisy ghost, that's what it means. So, and they say that it almost always happens at night, all this stuff. And I mean, yeah, if we're going with the poltergeist thing and being tied to a person's psyche, nighttime's when your mind turns to not necessarily negative things, but I don't know, that's when you have the time because you're winding down, especially if you're in bed. It's when all the thoughts flood you, right? That's kind of when you start to think about stressful things, and then things get sorted out in dreams, and that's when fears come to you at night, in bed, in the dark. You know where I'm going with this, right? Just theories and observations. And then I did just think that the homemade Ouija board was really interesting. I like the idea of making your own Ouija board with a saucer and letters cut out of the newspaper. And then they said maybe this was a tie, or maybe even like an origin to the activity, because they didn't close out their seance. They didn't say goodbye, or whatever it may be. So I don't know. I will say I don't really know what to make of Ouija boards, because in some way I think they're kind of silly, but at the same time, I'm superstitious enough to not use them because, I don't know. Yeah, I just don't want to take any chances, I guess. I've had one experience with a Ouija board that was strange, but it didn't, I never had the planchette move or anything. One time I was at a party, like a middle school party or something, and we pulled out a Ouija board, and the planchette was moving around, but I'm positive that people were just moving it. I did not trust the people that were doing it, so. But the one time I had something weird happen, we were asking questions on the Ouija board, and the planchette never moved or anything, but we heard this really loud banging on the wall. This was in my house that I grew up in, and it was really freaky, and no idea what could have caused it, because it was really, really loud. Anyway, and so I didn't mess with I haven't messed with one since, because I don't want to take my chances. But also, I like them because they're just very iconic little tools of the supernatural. But yeah, seeing the little, like the Hasbro Ouija board, it's kind of hard to take seriously. The homemade Ouija board almost seems more effective because you are actually intentionally making it. Anyway, a lot going into that story and a lot to chew on. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next one. And this one was submitted by Elena Maria. It took place in Michigan, and it's called The Easter Bunny. This happened a long time ago. I'm almost 20, and this happened when I was 5 or 6. At that age, I didn't know anything about ghosts, and I don't know if this was a ghost, but I can tell you, I wasn't hallucinating. I'll give you a basic description of my house. My bedroom is the farthest room in the house. If you walk out of my room, there is a hallway that leads to the dining room. There are a few rooms on both sides. My mom's room is right next to mine, then a guest room, and then my bathroom. On Easter morning, at right around 4 a.m, I woke up. It was normal for me because I would have to use the bathroom. I didn't sleep with my door closed at the time, so it was open. I never liked to use the bathroom at night because it was too far away from my room. I'm scared of the dark, but that night I had to. I walked to my doorway and looked down the hallway and into the dining room. And you know how little kids take pictures with the life-size Easter bunny? Yeah, there was one in my dining room. This thing was huge, and being a little kid, this was scary. The lights weren't on, and I didn't want to turn them on. Being a little kid, things went through my mind like, what if I get killed, or what if I won't get my basket? I decided to go to my mom's bathroom. My mom was in her bed. Trust me, I checked. I was in her room for 5 minutes or so, and when I went out to go back to my room, the bunny was gone. No one believes me when I tell them the story, and it makes me upset because it's very true. Please let me know if this has happened to you. Well, first of all, I already know that they aren't the only person to have this experience because I've read stories on my channel of people seeing the Easter Bunny. It comes up on other shows too, other paranormal shows. It is something that people report. But to further reinforce that, there are some comments addressing this. Spocky says, quote, I saw a shadow figure that looked like the Easter Bunny one evening when I was a little kid. It disappeared into the wall in our living room. There are trickster spirits in our world that like to assume various shapes to mess with us. My grandmother once told me she saw something that looked like Santa Claus sitting at our kitchen table one night, and she was a God-fearing woman that did not make things up. End quote. So yeah, that is one of the theories that people use to explain why someone would see an Easter bunny or Santa Claus or a Muppet or cartoon character, that it's a guise taken on by something else to maybe allure whoever's perceiving it. Another theory is that it's imagery projected from the witness onto whatever they see, because whatever they see wouldn't make sense or would terrify whoever sees it. So instead, whether it's your brain doing it or whether it's the entity or whatever, puts on this kind of projected screen of something that wouldn't scare you, or something that your mind can wrap its head around. So who really knows? Also, I'm not there. Plenty of people say, like they said, when they tell the story, no one believes them. It's your childhood mind, the human brain looks for shapes, finds shapes in shadows and in dark rooms. But, when I'm reading these stories, I just like to respect that people are very adamant that they said they weren't hallucinating. It's upsetting to them that people don't believe them. They're not the only person who says it. And, they're really putting themselves out there by saying that they saw the Easter Bunny, because it is very silly to most people. Cuddle Bear says, quote, "I can in all honesty say this has never happened to me, but I have a friend, now nearing 60, who swears he saw Santa in his house when he was 5 or 6. Since I've started looking into the weird, I've discovered that there are a number of adults who claim to have seen Santa, the Easter Bunny, or some other entity when they were young." End quote. Yeah, a lot of Santa and Easter Bunny. It's these holiday figures. Oracle Mache says, quote, "There are reports of a being with a man's body and a rabbit head, often seen wearing a tuxedo. My oldest child saw it, and so did his friend. So, you're not alone. I believe that our thoughts shape our reality. If enough raw emotion is put into an idea, it can take on a life of its own. In this case, literally, a child's thoughts, in theory, could be more powerful because of their openness, maybe. It's a theory that I'm tossing around." End quote. I haven't heard of this tuxedo-wearing, rabbit-headed man before, but I'm intrigued. And as far as their theory of child's thoughts taking shape in reality, like a tulpa, it's an interesting theory and definitely one they're not alone in expressing. So, yeah, what's really going on? Who knows, but plenty of people have similar stories. Like Cuddle Bear said, once you start looking into paranormal stories and stuff like that, it comes up quite often. So it is always interesting when people decide to share this experience, because I haven't had that experience, but it fascinates me. It really does. Anything like that, the Easter Bunny Santa, the puppets, or Muppets, or cartoons, it's just so bizarre. Yeah, and I imagine it is for people who actually experience it. Next, we are going to read an experience from Ireland that was submitted by the Little Boxes, and it's called "The People Who Lived in the Corner." When I was a kid, I grew up in one completely average house. There was no history of tragedy. In fact, we were its second owners, and the previous family had no negative experiences. I remember growing up that I didn't like being left alone in the sitting room. I didn't object much because my parents were only a meter away, but the corner on the far right at the bottom, had something off about it. I would regularly find myself being pulled into a kind of trance where the room would grow dark, and then the corner seemed to be blinding me with strobe lighting. I could see them when I was like that, the little people in there. They had long, sharp fingers, sharper than anything I could imagine, still visible, but so thin you'd question where they ended. And the boxes, millions of tiny white boxes, perfect cubes spilling out of the corner around them. They had a certain smell, too, metallic and sharp. Everything about them was sharp. The air would taste like metal, too. Maybe that's what the boxes were. They didn't always notice me, but they didn't like children. I knew that. Sometimes I would feel them scratching my arms, but there was never any trace of them after I snapped out of it, with the exception of the sharp smell fading away. But still, my parents couldn't see or smell anything. To them, it was just a corner. Sometimes I wonder if it was even real, but it happened too regularly to ignore. By the time I was 6, I couldn't see or feel them anymore. I think I'm too old to see them now. I've had no physical damage, but I'm well aware of how uncomfortable it can be to experience something such as this and be uncertain as to how to proceed. While I can't say I have the answer to this question, I would be happy to discuss the encounters, and I would greatly appreciate knowing whether or not these experiences were common to anyone else's lives. Now that's a weird one. So abstract. I mean, the little people that they saw in the corner were strange enough. These really, really sharp fingers, but these millions of tiny white boxes that were spilling out of the corner around them. It's so weird. Yeah, I've never heard anything quite like that. And I will say, I was talking earlier about how windows seem to be a twixt and tween kind of place, and doorways and things like that. I think corners are too. Maybe I could make an argument for anything, but no, not really. But corners are one too, because it's a meeting place. It's a border place in that it's where borders come together, walls and floors and ceilings. So I do think there is something to corners. I've read a couple of stories where people see things in corners. And it's so common to see things out of the corner of your eye. And I have the same logic for that. Corners, in some ways, is this thin place or this twixt and tween place where it might be easier to perceive the normally imperceptible. Who knows if there's any validity to that, but it is something that I think about. So let's read some of the comments, because I also want to know if someone else has had a similar experience, because I have not heard anything quite like this before. D&K writes, quote, I had the experience of regularly seeing someone in the corner when I was little, 3 years old and younger. I don't recall what they were, only the stories my mom tells me about pointing to the corner, crying hysterically, and saying she was going to hurt, quote-unquote, him when she vacuumed there, end quote. So they don't have the boxes, but again, someone saying that they would see something or someone, it sounds like, in the corner. I remember one, I think it might have been my very first video on the ceiling. I think it was that one. No, it was Backwards Knees, which was my second video. But it's such a memorable story. It was someone who could see this little man up in the corner, but like the ceiling corner. I don't know if it was one particular room or they would see it in different places. But this little man who was like, his legs and arms were turned, maybe not his arms. Anyway, his like limbs were inverted. I think specifically his legs, so that it would like hold himself up into the corner and he would just stare at the witness. Really interesting story. Okay, this comment by Twilights1011 says, quote, I find your experience to be really interesting, and given the age you said you were able to see these curious creatures at, and the age you say you are no longer able to see them at, makes me wonder if there's a reason why that is. Like, with the paranormal world, it's said that children of a young age are more acceptable, maybe they meant susceptible? I don't know, to see spirits, and that older people are unable to, unless they have the gift to. I've read other accounts that have talked about the in-betweeners that are said to be seen in doorways, etc. It's supposedly like a portal to their world, I think. Not implying that that's what you saw, but just that, with that said, I believe there's a lot more to our world than what we can see. I believe there's other worlds that are around us, but we're blinded to see it. So maybe what you saw is what people grow up to be blinded to as they get older, from what we're told is real and what's not. Perhaps at that time, those little people you saw allowed you to see them for the time being until you reached a certain age. These are just some ideas I have, so don't take this as me claiming to be certain of it. But like I said, I really do believe there's more to our world than we can see and know. So I don't dismiss the oddities that happen as not being real, or just an act of imagination. You never know what's right in front of us that we're just too blind to see. End quote. That is such a great comment. I really appreciate them sharing their thoughts, that they think that there's more to perceive than what we can see. And so they don't dismiss strange things that happen. I think that too. Although I'm still just very aware of that it's not really the status quo or something to think that and to believe that. So I still edit myself sometimes, but I do think that. I know that there's more than we can perceive. I mean, that's just true on a fundamental level as far as even just like a light spectrum or things like that. But I think it goes farther than that. I mean, think about any given time you're driving or you're in a car, especially if you're driving though, you have to look at the road. So there's so much that you miss all the time. I mean, you could pass by a million things that you don't see because you're not looking and you can't look. If you're on a hike through the woods, there's so much that we don't see. I mean, some it's because it's too small, right? You can't see every bug or every bird, every creature that we have scientifically documented going about their business, but it's teeming with life that we don't see. So I think you get my point. And then maybe these types of places like doorways or corners or windows are a kind of portal, is the word they said. I'm not sure what word I would want to use. I can't really pick out the word. So for lack of a better word, portal to seeing things. I know that's a little out there, although I think some people pick up what I'm putting down. Anyway, I also love this term they use. They said, I've read other accounts that have talked about the in-betweeners that are said to be seen in doorways, etc. I love that, the in-betweeners. That's just such a fun little name for things that are seen in between places. Thin places. All right, so finally, I'm just going to read a comment by the OP. They say, quote, I do believe that my age... Oh yeah, before I go on, of course, you know, what they said about age. This is something that people talk about all the time, that I talk about constantly. It's just that children seem to have the ability to see these weird things much more than adults, and who knows why. I know the main thing that people say is that, yeah, you don't have walls built up to what's normal and what you're supposed to see and what you're not supposed to see and what's real and what's not. So your aperture is just fully open. And as you get into adulthood, you're told what's normal and what's not. And it's like I was saying, it's something I struggle with, even though it is something I really do think and have experienced weird things, and I love hearing about other people's experiences, and I too think that they're genuine experiences a lot of the time. Okay, so OP says, I do believe that my age had something to do with my inability to see them after a certain point. I thought you may be interested to know that after I posted this, about a week later, I was brushing my hair when I was hit by the same sharp smell and taste. I couldn't see anything, but it felt like something was watching me. Maybe it was just my imagination after thinking about them after all these years. Or maybe I'm only now realizing that they may be everywhere. I've heard of similar stories like the duende, but these seem to be more malicious. Of course, there's every chance that I could have upset them when I was so young and just don't recall the events. End quote. It would be cool to have a better, more thorough description of the little people besides them having these really sharp, impossibly thin fingers. But the fact that they mentioned duende makes me think maybe they looked like little goblins. And they said that these seem more malicious than duende. I do also think there's different interpretations, it seems like, of duende. Even the word is translated in different ways. Sometimes it's translated as gnome, sometimes it's translated as goblin, sometimes as elf. Sometimes people do characterize them as being kind of malicious and dangerous, and other times maybe they're just kind of mischievous and aloof. I could be wrong about that. Anyway, that's interesting that they posted their story and then a week later they were hit by that smell. I didn't comment on that smell earlier, but yeah, that is a very interesting part of that. It seems like the smell would only be there with them. It seemed to fade out after they left. So that's interesting. A lot of times smell is associated with paranormal or strange encounters. A lot of times it's a sulfurous smell. I know Joshua Cutchin has a whole book about that called The Brimstone Deceit. I haven't read it, but I'm aware that that's what it's about. I don't know if I've heard of this sharp metallic smell and taste going along with a experience before, but it's definitely not unusual to have all these different sensory elements to an experience. So when they smelled that metallic scent and taste, it made them think that it could have been their imagination, of course, because they had just been talking about them, thinking about them, writing about them, but also making them question that maybe they are still around and they just can't see them. Very interesting. Could go either way, but it's fascinating. Okay, our next experience took place in Canada. This was submitted by Ren. It's called the vortex ceiling. When I was about 6 years old, I had an experience in my stepmother's house that still nags at me. I was lying in bed on a particularly windy night. I couldn't sleep because the sound of the wind was so loud. I was staring at my ceiling when all of a sudden, all at the same time, the noise of the wind picked up to the point where it sounded like I was inside a tornado. We don't have tornadoes in the area I'm from. I heard a large bird cawing, and a black and red smoky swirl thing started opening above my head. It grew to the size of my entire room until my whole ceiling was a giant red and black swirling vortex, and flying just around the outside of the vortex was a very large bird. I couldn't feel any wind or smell any smoke, and I couldn't make out exactly what type of bird it was because I could only see the underside of it, but I heard everything perfectly. I stared at it really hard for what seems like a very long time. Then I blinked really hard a few times, but it was still there. I know what I saw and heard. I know I wasn't dreaming. I have heard of a vortex before, and I guess that's what most people would probably call it. But I've seen pictures online of funny-shaped lights and things of that nature that people call vortices, and that was nothing like what I saw that night. So I really don't know what to make of it. Has anyone else ever had a similar experience? You'll notice that a lot of these stories end the same way, with someone saying, has anyone ever had a similar experience? And I leave that in because I think it's so important. I mean, people are putting this out there because they're looking for validation and someone who can relate and confirm what they experienced. So I think that says something. This goes in with those childhood bedroom experiences that I love so much, that I cite all the time and have episodes dedicated just to these kind of things. Just these really strange things that kids in particular see as they're lying in bed at night, but not asleep, not dreaming. And this is another one. This crazy, weird, swirling black and red cloud formation just opening on their ceiling and this really loud wind sound. So, I mean, that kind of sound does go with, if we were going to talk about parasomnia, sleep disorder kind of experiences, that's something that would be associated with like exploding head syndrome, which is hearing loud sounds as you're entering or coming out of sleep. But they said they weren't asleep, so probably wasn't that, but it just reminded me of that because I've experienced that before. People hear all kinds of crazy things, like it sounds like a washing machine, off kilter, but then also these, like we were talking earlier about how smells can go along with experiences, sounds are the same way. And they did say it was a really windy night, but the wind sound became like deafening. And then they heard and saw this weird big bird. For some reason, I imagined like a big buzzard, a big cartoon vulture or something flying on the outside of this swirling cloud formation. Really strange. So, some people do comment. I'm going to read a couple. One is from Nuvovo, who says, quote, I am very excited to hear your story. I experienced something very, very similar about 40 years ago as a child. My story is a little different, but there are several commonalities. The red and black are exactly what I saw, almost like swirling lines of red and black, very vivid. I only learned about vortex spirits while playing with Google one night a couple of years ago. Just now, I re-Googled the info and found this story. I joined the site hoping to be able to send you a note. I see that your post is 3 years old. I hope you stop in to check here. It would be great to figure out a way to talk. End quote. So another thing about these kinds of experiences, say what you will about the legitimacy of them actually happening or it not just being some kind of hallucination, but it sticks with people all their life. This commenter says it happened 40 years ago and they still think about it and Google it on a semi-regular basis. So real or not, they're very significant moments in people's life. I find that fascinating. And also, people will Google these types of things, like search, just type into Google exactly kind of like the wording of their weird experience. Like one common thing I've covered on here is floating down the stairs as a child. So I know people have typed into Google, I floated down the stairs as a child or something like that. So it sounds like this person did that kind of same thing, hoping to find someone who's experienced something similar. And they are so happy to find something remotely similar to what they experienced. And the similarities are swirling red and black. So the definition of a vortex is a mass of whirling fluid or air, especially a whirlpool or whirlwind. A maelstrom is a synonym. A swirl is a synonym. So that aligns with what these people are describing. Maelstrom is such a good word because that's really what I was thinking of in the OP's story. This maelstrom, great word. And then this person said swirling lines, a synonym for a vortex is swirl. So they sound like they are describing a vortex. But this word does come up in like paranormal discourse, much like portal. Like people say there's a vortex here. And I'm not saying maybe there isn't something wherever they're talking about there being a vortex, but when they say vortex, I'm just like, I don't know what we're talking about. Maybe they mean a vortex of energy, like a swirling of energy. I don't know, but it is kind of like a vague word that gets thrown out there, I think, like a portal. Not to be super critical of that, but anyway, the definition of vortex really seems to fit what these two people experienced. Another person says, Googlefish says, quote, I have to add to this experience. I know it's many years later, but when I was around the same age, around 6 or 8, I have this memory that I wish to share that has stayed with me, whereas all other memories have vanished from that time. I was in bed or asleep. I couldn't quite tell. I heard screams and voices crying out to me, and even now I'm having goosebumps from thinking about it. I heard figures asking me questions, telling me things, and crying out to me. At that point, I saw a whirlpool or vortex in black and gold and red, swirling and twisting, small at first, then growing to cover the entire ceiling, and a light, a strong light of gold that captured the entire room. And the moment I saw it engulf the ceiling, it went, and that was the end. I remember my mom saying she listened through the bedroom door because she could hear me speak to someone, and that I used to talk every night to something, end quote. Yeah, so a little different, but that one, they also saw this vortex of different colors grow and engulf the ceiling. So weird as this sounds, it resonated with 2 people, at least. There's probably more people out there. So your ghost stories, I mean, it's a great place because it is this forum where people can find similar experiences. It's not always perfect, like any forum, right? There are people on there who aren't so supportive and a little more dismissive, but generally it is a very supportive place. And, people are allowed to express their opinion if things are put out there on a public platform. You open yourself up to that. But it's always really cool to see people comment with their own similar experiences, especially when they're really excited and they've been searching for someone with a similar experience. So that is why I always like to read through the comments. And I also think people bring up really interesting ideas, as they do in some of the previous stories we've read. All right, I have one more story for you tonight. This one took place in Indiana and was submitted by Broken Dreamer. It's called The Winged Man Behind the Blackberry Bushes. So this is going to sound totally crazy, but this still haunts me to this day, and I just had to share. Because of the events that I'm about to share, my parents sold our house and moved us into the city, and we were never allowed outside after dark. I was about 6 when my family moved into this old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere in Indiana. There was an old barn that was falling apart, several cornfields, some crabapple trees, mulberry trees, blackberry and raspberry bushes, and there was a gun club just across the street that only ever had people around on Sundays. There was a bit of woods, and the nearest neighbor was about a mile down the road. We also had a pretty big yard that was in full view of almost every window in the house, and as long as we never went past the dirt patch between the yard and the barn, or past the trees or bushes, we were able to play wherever we wanted in the yard. It was early summer, and I was outside playing by myself. At some point in time, I got hungry and decided to snack on some blackberries. This was permitted by my parents as long as we made sure the berries were ripe. I was in the middle of collecting a handful of berries when I noticed I wasn't alone. There was what looked like a man with a wide-brimmed hat and a trench coat standing towards the back of the blackberry bushes. He was smiling at me and kept waving for me to come to him, and I grew very confused. Like I said, the nearest neighbors outside the gun club were about a mile down the road, so lost visitors wasn't exactly something that happened regularly. I tried asking him different questions about who he was and what he was doing there, but I only got the wave indicating he wanted me to approach, and I kept hearing this strange wheezing noise. From what I understand, my mom happened to look out the kitchen window and saw me standing by the blackberry bushes talking to someone. Now, I was a very active kid with an even more active imagination at the time, so I was always playing by myself and talking to imaginary people, so it wouldn't have struck her as strange behavior at first. However, when she noticed that I was standing there longer than I would if I was playing a game, she came out to investigate and asked me what I was doing. I immediately pointed to the man in the bushes, and I watched the color drain from my mom's face. She immediately ordered me to go inside and get my dad. After hearing the fear in her voice, I sensed something was wrong, and I ran to the house as I was afraid she was hurt. She was pregnant at the time with one of my little sisters. As I ran, I heard my mom scream, and something massive burst through the bushes. I don't know why or how, but something told me not to look up or back. So I lowered my gaze towards the ground. That's when I saw it. The shadow of what looked like a man with bat-shaped wings. From here, everything gets fuzzy, but I remember people coming over to the house to ask me questions about the man and what had happened. And my sisters and I were forced to sleep in the living room until my parents finally sold the house later that winter. I had almost forgotten everything until I was 18 and discovered the movie Jeepers Creepers. Watching both movies, I was reminded of the man I had seen at the back of the bushes and was about to write it off as my imagination when my mom came up and asked me what I thought about the movies. I told her they were scary and reminded me of the man back at the farmhouse, and I could see the color drain from her face. She immediately told me that I was never to bring it up again. But now I'm really curious. Is there really a creature like the creeper? What kept it from scooping me up as a kid? Why was my mom so afraid if it was nothing but my imagination? Maybe someone here has answers, or some kind of explanation. Okay, so I love that story. I kind of saved it for the end because it might be my favorite. These are all really, really interesting stories. That's why I chose them. But this one, I don't know. I just really like it. It's really strange. And I don't know, it has such a atmosphere about it. I can picture this scene and this setting so vividly, and that always helps just make a story come to life. Something that also stuck out to me is the blackberry bushes. This happens right as they're collecting berries. They're in the middle of collecting a handful of berries when they notice they aren't alone. And strange as this may sound, picking blackberries, just berries in general, but blackberries often do come into play, very specifically a lot of the time. But there's something about picking berries that has a tie to strange experiences. For example, when you're filling out the fairy census, if you aren't familiar with the fairy census, I have all kinds of videos about it, but all you need to know is that it's a survey where people submit their first-hand experience with a fairy or something adjacent perhaps. But anyway, you fill out all these questions when you're submitting your story, and one of them is, were you in the middle of a repetitive action, such as picking berries? And, well, Simon Young, who's the researcher behind the fairy census, he does find that there's a tie, a significance to repetitive actions that has some sort of relationship to having a strange experience. Picking berries or harvesting mushrooms or doing something like this is one of those actions because it's a very repetitive action. When you have these kind of tedious repetitive actions, maybe you can go into some kind of light trance state. Maybe your mind can wander. Maybe your perception can open. Who knows? But you would be amazed how many experiences, whether it's fairies, Bigfoot. I just listened to an old episode of Strange Familiars where the person who was telling their story said they were picking blackberries, actually. And Tim said, this comes up all the time, that people are picking berries and then they see Bigfoot. So it's really interesting. One, like I said, is this repetitive action, but it's so funny that this specific activity of picking berries leads to a strange sighting. I don't know, maybe it has to do with a nature entity. Fairies and Bigfoot are both kind of nature entities, but this winged man, I don't know. And then also fairies, I won't devolve into this, but fairies have specific ties to blackberries as well, like the puka, which is one of my favorite Irish fairies that takes on all these different forms, from a black dog to a black horse to an eagle that's big enough that you can ride on it, to a little goblin, to a big bunny, to a hairy man. Anyway, there was this common knowledge and sentiment in Ireland that you don't eat blackberries after Halloween because the puka spits on them or pees on them and befouls them anyway. And so you don't eat blackberries or brambles, as they're also called. I think bramble might actually be the plant, and then blackberries are the fruit. Could be wrong about that, but yeah, you don't eat them the day after Halloween because the puka has nastied them up. Now, this probably means that, they're out of season at that point, so you could get sick by eating them. But it's interesting how the puka is tied up in these blackberries. In other places, I think it said that the devil spits on the blackberries after Michaelmas. Who knows what this being was, but yeah, a man crouched behind, well, he says standing. I imagined him kind of crouched, but he does say standing towards the back of the blackberry bushes. So behind the bushes, or kind of like inside the bushes, there's a man wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a trench coat, and he's smiling and waving for the witness, beckoning them over. Doesn't say anything, even when the witness interacts with them, just beckoning. So creepy, really strange. And as they said, it's probably pretty unlikely that someone had actually just wandered their way onto their property. guess it's not impossible. And then also, it says they kept hearing this strange wheezing noise. That is so weird. There's something about it that really makes me think of like a Men in Black experience, probably just the high strangeness of it. So anyway, of course, they call their mom out, and their mom seems to see this person too, although I guess she never really directly acknowledges it, at least not that they say in the story, but says, "Go get your dad." And then as our witness is running inside, their mom screams, they hear this big sound, and then they see the shadow on the ground of a man with bat-shaped wings. So if you haven't seen the movie Jeepers Creepers, which they reference here, honestly, it's a pretty good movie. If you like horror movies, it's kind of a modern classic at this point. It's from 2001, and it stars Justin Long, and his character and his sister are driving down these really rural kind of cornfield 2-lane highway, and they start getting tailed by this old beat-up truck, and it's like riding their ass, right? And kind of intimidating them. And then finally they see it pull off into this like creepy house. I won't go into it too far, I guess, just in case you haven't seen this, 25-year-old movie nearly. But anyway, the monster in the movie really honestly does kind of fit this description. It's a man with a hat, kind of like a cowboy hat, and a big like duster kind of coat, and these bat wings. But he doesn't just look like a normal man. I mean, his face is all creepy and weird. He looks very much like a monster. Yeah, so they saw that movie and they're like, this is the closest thing I've seen. It instantly reminded them of the man in the bushes. And so bring it up to their mom, and she just says, we're not going to talk about that. So that was a really, really strange one. Unfortunately, they ask for answers, and a couple people respond, but I don't know, I didn't save any of the comments, I guess. No one had a similar experience, and, people can only speculate. Is there really a creature like that? I don't know. I mean, if you read the Mothman prophecies, that's going to sound like something that could be in the Mothman prophecies by John Keel, these winged humanoids. If you haven't read the Mothman prophecies, it's not really anything like the movie, although I do kind of like the movie because it captures the atmosphere, I would say, of that book. But really, the Mothman prophecies is not really a linear story. I mean, buried deep within the book, there is kind of this event unfolding, but really it's just John Keel dumping a bunch of his research and case reports and stuff, and a lot of them are winged humanoids. If that really exists, I don't know, but there certainly are reports, seemingly. If we were to go right now on Phantoms and Monsters and I typed in winged humanoid, we would find some. So they're not alone in this sighting, and maybe that is something I'll have to look into, some of the winged humanoid sightings. But yeah, really just the little details about this story, the blackberry bushes, how he was silent, whoever this person was silent and beckoning and wheezing, seemingly, and just the atmosphere and the setting that I really felt like I could picture this farmhouse with all these windows, and I really, really like that story. It's really strange. As I said, unfortunately, no one really comes forward in the comments with something similar, but I know without checking that similar stories are out there that people have seen. Some sort of winged humanoid. This is kind of like a Hatman, Mothman crossover. So we thank Broken Dreamer for sharing this story, and everyone for sharing their stories, these very strange stories that it's really hard to come forward with, I would imagine. So luckily, there is a forum like Your Ghost Stories where people can. And with that, we are going to finish up for the night. I hope you enjoyed all those stories. I really did, and just going through the comments and hearing the similar experiences and people's really interesting theories on whatever's going on here. It's just a lot to chew over, and that's the fun part, is because we don't have the answers. So you can just speculate, and for some people, that's not fun, but that is kind of the fun for me, is that it's open to speculation and interpretation. I'm okay with not having the answers, as I've said before. Maybe I almost prefer it in a way. So one other thing I wanted to say really quickly before I sign off is I think I'm going to start numbering the episodes. It's not something I've done up until now, but I think I'm going to start doing that just because it might be easier to reference if I want to point you in the direction of a particular episode. I can just tell you the number because I'm honestly really not great with naming episodes. So I usually just name them kind of a string of, concepts or themes or things that come up in the episode. And that can be a little long-winded when trying to name off an episode that I'm referencing. So I'm going to start numbering episodes. This is episode number 82, which when I went and looked at how many episodes and videos and stuff, there's many more videos on YouTube than there are on a podcast platform. So if you've only listened on a podcast platform and you've never gone to my YouTube page, there is quite a few additional episodes. Because I only started uploading to a podcast platform like within this year, maybe, hard to say. But yeah, I didn't backlog my old episodes onto podcast platforms. So anyway, there is additional if that is the case. But I thought that was really cool that I have over 80 episodes that I've completed. That's just wild. I didn't make any mention of it at the time. It's the end of August now. And it was June or July. That's when my anniversary is. So 3 years this summer of doing the show. And I just really love it so much. I just get such a kick out of making these and finding these stories and exploring these concepts and getting to hear from people who comment or email me. That's probably the best part, getting to connect with people. And I've connected with other people who make podcasts and do research. And yeah, so it's been awesome. And I look forward to continuing. And I'm very excited for October and Halloween and all that. I'm trying to prep for October to just make it a fun, spooky time. Take advantage of the season. So anyway, thank you so much for listening. Whether this is the first episode you've heard or the 82nd episode you've heard, I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to something that I've put together and made with very much love. I'll be back very soon with more stories. So until next time, take care and good night.